Again, whoops, is that my? Does Ann, you said Ann, what did you say about Ann? I'm sorry.
I can hear now.
Okay, fine. So we're back.
Oh, good, thank you.
Okay. All right, well, welcome everyone to the January meeting of the Kensington Police Protection Community Service District Board meeting. Linnell, will you call the roll, please?
Sure. Vice President Aquino Fike.
Here.
Director Duggan.
Here.
Director Goff.
Here.
Director Hassai.
Here.
President Spath.
Here. Just a couple comments before we get into the agenda. I want to wish everyone a happy new year to begin with. And secondly, you hopefully have read the general manager's report. We have a lot of challenges coming up in 2024, a lot of issues to deal with. And frankly, it's important that we have public participation as we move forward on these issues. Good governance really depends on public participation and involvement. And unfortunately, we have not had good participation in the past, and unfortunately, as evidenced by this evening, we have very few attendees. I don't know how many are online, but certainly it's not a large number. And so for those of you who continue to participate, I would encourage you to reach out to your neighbors, friends, and encourage them to get involved. Because frankly, only through public participation do we understand what the public's priorities are and how they feel about the issues that we're dealing with. And so with that, I also want to mention that on the agenda, we're going to flip item 7. It'll become item 8, which is the discussion and approval of purchasing the Flock public safety camera software. And number 7 will become discussion and approval of a plate reader policy. So let's start out with public comment. Anyone in the audience who would like to make a public comment first, and then those online, if you'll raise your hand, we'll call on you and you can provide your comments as well. So is there anyone in the audience who has any comments? No, having seen none. Linnell, do we have anyone on?
Uh,
Okay,
Online.
can you
Sure.
bring that? I'm sorry?
Lynn,
Yeah, okay.
Hi, can
Hi,
you
Lynn.
hear me?
Oh,
Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
yeah, Lynn, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Happy New Year, everybody. And Dave, welcome to the presidency. It's a huge responsibility, and I know you'll handle it well. I spoke at a prior meeting about my concern about the absence of the police department showing up for a medical emergency at my home. My nephew was a house guest. He suffers from epilepsy and he had an epileptic seizure. It took over 10 minutes for fire to show up. No one from the police department showed up. It used to be police would show up within 3 minutes for any medical emergency. I was told that the general manager would look into this and get back to me. I never heard anything. So I'm wondering what the situation is, why we don't see police at medical emergencies anymore. And then we couple that with stories of the police socializing in the parking lot down in El Cerrito and not being present enough to have been a deterrent for a carjacking with a weapon.
I'd be happy to talk to her on the phone.
You'll call me, Dave?
Yeah, I'll be back in the office on Monday if you want to
Oh, I'm sorry.
contact me.
Okay. So you want me to contact you?
She indicates that do you want her to contact you?
Yes, you can give me a call or shoot me an email and then I'll respond.
Okay. Wonderful.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you very much.
And
I think we need to address the technical difficulties we're having, at least to tell the audience what's going on and why there's no camera picture, and maybe to try to get the sound in this room better so that we directors can hear. We're having some technical problems.
Yes. There's a hardware problem, it seems, or there seems to be a hardware problem for the audio output on from the computer to the speakers here. and also from the video output from the computer to the projector. It's this HDMI cable or the connection. I'm unable to diagnose it right now. But people at home can hear just fine. But we have to use our computer speakers to hear it tonight, locally, inside.
So I guess when people are speaking to us, we can quickly turn on our speakers and then turn them off right away.
Recording in progress.
Well, either that or if you could bring your microphone, Linnell, right up to your speaker there, maybe it can transfer through that.
This,
Linnell, if you put that microphone that you have in your hand close to the computer microphone, then we might be able to hear better what's happening when people are speaking.
Yeah, let's try that as opposed to trying to go back and forth on the,
And everybody, please speak up.
yes. Okay, so there are no further comments. Well,
There's also an issue that people are joining as panelists. Oh, sorry, never mind. I looked at the wrong view. Excuse me. I'm sorry. But yeah, that's fine. Never mind.
okay. Any other comments?
Well, I should probably note that I'm having technical difficulties on my computer, so I keep getting kicked off. So I will from time to time share with President Spath.
Thank you.
Ann Saprell is listed as a attendee versus a participant. Is that what you want? There's a listing for, all right, never mind. She is also a panelist, correct?
she was on as panelist. Let's see, I'll promote her back panelist.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we now technically correct. So you mean the microphone? Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Next item is the consent calendar. The minutes, are there any issues with the minutes amongst the directors? Or from the public for that matter? Okay, and also with regard to the December bills, any questions with regard to the December bills? Okay, do I hear a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I move that we approve the consent calendar.
I think this can be.
Second.
I think this is a voice vote. Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Any noes? Any abstentions?
Yes. Do I explain?
Yes,
Jake,
please.
Explain why?
Yes.
Just, I am working with Fernando on a personal landscape project, so I cannot, vote on the bills paid.
Okay. So we have one abstention and 4 yays. Okay. All right, moving on. We'll have a discussion now of the approval of the plate reader policy, which is now agenda 7. And Chief, I think, are you going to make the presentation or David, is it you?
Let's start off the conversation by saying that when this agenda, the clock, software, information of what the board
When the flock software was brought to the board a couple of months ago, it was imperative. We all agreed that we needed a policy to go with it. So we're bringing both items back to the board. And so we're addressing the policy that has been placed in your board packet to cover if we approve the public camera software.
Good evening, members of the board.
You're gonna have to be very close to that.
Any closer, I think I might get COVID. I don't know. See about that. How's that better? Good evening, members of the board, General Manager Randa, members of the public. 100% accurate from the general manager's perspective. We brought the program to the board. Flock presented, we presented a PowerPoint as well. And it was tabled for policy review. The policy's been submitted. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about it. We've also, I know the general manager has run this through a few different legal channels as well, BKK and their law enforcement representative, legal counsel, along with Anne. I believe she's still on. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the policy. Better?
You need to speak loud because we have some people in the audience that can't hear well.
You might be one of them, boss. Better? All right. I apologize.
Let's start out with board comments. Or any comments with regard to the policy?
Sure.
Director Goff.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chief. Thank you all for working hard on this policy. I think the board has done its due diligence. I know I looked at it closely and it seems like a good policy. I had some questions around I just making sure that it was crystal clear that any that basically acts that are legal in California would be protected and that other jurisdictions couldn't request data for acts that are illegal, maybe in their jurisdictions, but legal here. And specifically mentioned in the policy are two examples, one relating to reproductive rights and one relating to immigration, and which is great. And I just had questions which I asked directly to council to make sure that that was, that it was actually, it could be broader, essentially, that anything that was legal in California would be essentially protected. And because we can all anticipate that there would be many other things that may, let's just say, are okay in like Florida or not okay in Florida and okay here. And so I was assured that they are, and there's a, I forget, I think it's on page 7. It says specifically that if the act, essentially the request must comply with the laws of the state of California and the federal laws and local laws. So it's all covered. I understand from council too, that this policy is more specific and more protective of civil liberties than a lot of other districts. So I felt very reassured and I feel good about it. And thank you all for your work.
Sorry.
I also read the policy, obviously, as we all should, very carefully, made notes, raised some questions or asked for clarifications around data storage and the records maintenance and release policy, received, answers that I felt were appropriate. And I know there were concerns when we first brought this up. I feel like my concerns have been addressed. I feel like this is a stronger policy than many jurisdictions. It's appropriate, I believe, for our community. And the presentation a couple months ago, in particular by Sergeant Landy, when, I think for us as a community, we always struggle with staffing in the best of times and in the worst of times. And right now, nationally, it's kind of the worst of times when it comes to recruitment. And I believe this strikes the right balance between our needs and the needs to protect civil liberties. So I am satisfied with this policy. I do understand that I believe it is Piedmont that has a public transparency portal, which is something that Chief Gankaz is encouraging us to develop. That is an operational matter, not a matter necessarily of policy, that I think will also be something that the public will appreciate. He might be able to explain that a little bit, and perhaps he and the GM can talk about whether that's going to be implemented or not. but the policy as it stands, I believe is appropriate and I have no requested changes.
Director Duggan?
So I, perhaps too late, about 5 days ago, emailed some changes and suggestions about some typos and questions to the chief and general manager Aranda. And I don't see those reflected. And, that concerns me. Some of them were very minor, but I do want to bring up a couple of things. So on page 2, item 426.3.1, ALPR administrator under E. So basically, this paragraph is saying this includes but is not limited to, their responsibilities for compliance with the requirements of civil code, blah, 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 includes but is not limited to. And this paragraph under E just doesn't make much sense. It's not good English. It says the title and name of the current designee in overseeing the ALPR operation is maintained. So I think what they're trying to say is a record will be kept of the titles and names of the people responsible for overseeing the ALPR over time. Then it says continually working with the custodian of records on the retention and destruction of ALPR data, period. Working with the custodian of records on the retention and destruction of ALPR data. That's clearly a cut and paste error, and it's a sentence fragment. So I tried to, suggest that, I guess, just one piece of that, designee will, continually work with the custodian records on the retention and destruction of ALPR data. I mean, I just would like it to state clearly what it's supposed to say.
I'm sorry, I noted that too, and I should have said that there is an error there.
That's just not clear. So there's that. I'm sure that's really just, semantics. Then if you look on page 5, so this is about the retention of data, which is a very important issue. I was sent an ACLU article on recommendations for ALPRs by Sylvia Ellsbury of the KCC. In that article, it recommends that data be maintained only for the shortest possible time. They cited New Hampshire, which is 3-day period, which to me is a little too short. And what's confusing here is flock data, I guess, will purge their, so if you go to the middle of paragraph 2, flock safety will purge their data at the end of the 30 days of storage. Flock keeps saying there's a 30-day limit. That to me is not too bad. But then above it says, all ALPR data downloaded to the server shall be stored for no longer than 1 year. So I'm thinking that's the downloaded data that we have. Kensington.
Actually, I raised this as well, and this is what my understanding is. The ALPR data downloaded to the server, in my understanding, is downloaded to, I think, a DOJ server. And then DOJ, then the second piece is that ALPR vendor, Flock, will store it in their data towers, but they purge it at 30 days.
Let's have the chief speak
Well,
to
we
that if you don't
discussed
mind.
this. We're not necessarily in agreement, but
Well, just understand how it really works.
It does seem confusing. It's been through a half a dozen lawyers.
that's why it's confusing.
The first paragraph states all ALPR downloaded. Let's make it very clear. We're not downloading any ALPR data in the Kensington Police Department. We don't do it. All information is retained on a cloud operated by Flock. Flock dumps it after 30 days. This paragraph is sort of a catch-all, and it's referring to the basic state rules of dissemination of data or destruction of data. It can mean a number of things, but it's not relevant We don't keep any ALPR data. Block does, and they delete it all after 30 days. So I think that's sort of, again, these policies that Lexipol, which is a wonderful company, pushes out are generic and meant to be molded and fitted for each agency's purpose. So the second paragraph is more relevant to us. They're going to dump all the data after 30 days. We don't download any license plate data. Any data that we keep is kept for criminal investigation purposes. It goes to the DA's office for prosecution.
So when we keep data, we are doing a screen grab or printing something or?
Well, it's a officer written police report affidavit. On this date and time, I've received ALPR data for such and such, and I had followed up and investigated it. So that data would come in a printout from Block, and we would send that to the DA's office for prosecution.
I just would like it if this document would agree with itself internally. In other words, if the first paragraph said all data downloaded to the server shall be stored for no longer than 30 days. Other,
Well, let me just ask,
I'm being too picky.
I guess it's not been clear to me whose server that is and who controls it. Originally, it said that it should be stored no longer than 1 year, and I had asked that it be more decisive and said shall, but from what you're saying, we have no control over that?
Over what?
Over the data that is downloaded to the server?
Sir, we're not downloading anything to any server. Some agencies take ALPR flock data and keep it on their own private servers. We're not doing that. We're only accessing cloud data for Flock. And our agreement with Flock is that they purge all of Kensington's license plate data after 30 days.
One last question before I turn to Director Aquino. Do we need that phrase at all then? Can we just eliminate that reference? Download it to the
Can I
server?
interject something? If this was looked at and written by Lexipol, and it was also looked at by an expert at BB&K on public safety, why do we want to make changes?
I don't know that we want to make changes. I think what I believe the directors are asking is an understanding of what that means. In other words, it goes to a server, who controls the server? Because it doesn't sound like we control the server and Flock deletes the data in 30 days.
So what I'm understanding is this is written with a broader scope than we're actually using right now, but we may someday. So why wouldn't we keep all of that?
Let's just say, I don't know, something happened, the cloud, there's a disaster and we ended up having to, we couldn't, maybe one time they had to download data to our server because the cloud wasn't working. It's just the rule that if it is on your server, it has to be gone in a year. That's part of the record maintenance. I think it's more clear in this explanation from Chief Gankaz that there are two ways of dealing with data, and this policy is taking into account both ways, and we can never be sure that we won't use one or the other. So that clarification satisfies me, because these are not unusual questions. I had many of the same questions, and I think this explanation that there are multiple ways to take the data, we don't intend to do it with a download, but it could happen, and this follows sort of it provides for a policy. Should any download data have been downloaded, it must be deleted in a year. So I don't think there's any harm in keeping it. I think we are getting that explanation now. So I think I'm fine with how it is.
Director Aquino-Fike?
Yeah, I just had a few comments. First, I wanted to respond to General Manager Aranda, and I understand your frustration, and I agree it's been through many lawyers, but at the same time, we need to do this right. And if the directors want to have some good questions and have some good suggestions, I think we better take the time to really address those. I think the board, what I'm hearing is that we're all in general agreement that this policy is good and it's time to approve it. But I apologize for not catching some of the mistakes that Director Duggan caught, but those are real mistakes and they shouldn't be in here. And I do agree that that first paragraph is very confusing. And so I think there is, if we could phrase it the way you said it or the way you said it, it would be a lot clearer because we may all not be here in 10 years and I want this policy to be absolutely clear. So that's my preference. If we can make those changes, and I'm happy to take a stab at some of them.
Any other comments?
Can you hear me? Can I?
Hold on,
As for
Ann,
me,
hold on,
I-
Go ahead.
sorry, Ann Saprell's trying to,
Well, so I don't know the answers to these questions myself. But the other thing we could do instead of trying to change them on the record tonight, if you would be comfortable, is to approve it, then subject to clarification on paragraphs X, Y, and Z, which would come back to the board next month for your information. If you want to, if you want to go ahead and approve it, subject to those clarifications, you could do that. And then, we could work with, I could talk to my colleague who reviewed the policy. He probably knows what this, there might be a reason, maybe it is DOJ who downloads this information because it talks about, there may be a criminal case or something in which, that evidence would need to be accessed after 30 days, but maybe the district doesn't keep it, but maybe it's on somebody's server. I don't know. But I would hate to just delete it without really understanding, why it's there. So that's just a suggestion.
Any other comments? All right.
I would just say I'd be fine with that. I think we're going to need to do a round of, okay, what exactly are we going to do? But do you want to, maybe you want to hear from the public first before?
Right, let's hear from the public first before we get into the issue of approval or not. So do we have anyone on the,
Yeah, Ellsbury.
okay, Sylvia, if you want to,
Hi. First of all, I love CCTV and I'm really grateful to you for working on this and bringing it to us. I do want to point out a couple of things that, first of all, when I sent you the article from the ACLU, I sent it to you as a private citizen. It had nothing to do with KCC. And I feel that I should have been identified only as a resident, not Sylvia Ellsbury of KCC, okay? And the other thing is that I just have to point out, and it's in your hands, but the issue isn't whether Kensington is keeping this data and when they're dumping it. The issue is where is it being uploaded to Flock's network, and what are they doing it with it? How much are they sharing it? And I'm just going to leave you with this, that the language you are voting, or that you've adopted, or that's before you to adopt, is actually the quote unquote worst approach language in the ACLU article. And that's just, it's straight from Flock and it's the quote unquote worst approach. It's not an issue of whether this is legal, what you guys are trying to adopt. It's a question of best practice for privacy and rights. Okay. So I leave it in your capable hands. Thank you.
any other, comments online? No? Okay,
Can I ask
Talking
for a clarification from Sylvia?
with regard,
No, Sylvia Ellsbury.
well, I think, I think she's pretty much clear on what she thinks about the policy, particularly with regard to Flock. And I don't know that, and the chief can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that Flock does not share this information that we generate. It's strictly our data. It's deleted after 30 days and they do not share those data with any other jurisdiction.
Well, let's hear from the chief because
Yes,
we all may have different understandings. I understand that there is data sharing among jurisdictions that agree to share. For example, the way that El Cerrito let us know that there was a stolen car coming into Kensington, that would be something that could be shared. So let's let the chief answer that.
That is correct. The data that Flock stores that come from Kensington cameras is ours. And it's in their contract. They do not share it unless we authorize it. The question is, what does Flock do with it? Well, they've got some pretty in-depth contracts that we're in possession of that state exactly what they're going to do with it. And that is nothing until we approve it.
Director Duggan.
Question. So we are given hot lists. If we get a hit on a hot list, do we report to the person who generated that hot list that we got a hit?
There might be an imperfect understanding of what a hot list is. Okay. Some police departments, if we were looking for a particular suspect vehicle in Kensington, would generate a document for our purposes saying that we wanted people to find this car. We don't do that. We send information relevant to vehicles based on criminal investigations, whether or not a vehicle is stolen or it's wanted in a criminal investigation. We send all of that information to the Department of Justice. We don't send that stuff to Flock. The Department of Justice is the one that spits out lists of license plates that were used in bank robberies, homicides, and other things. And when one of those vehicles passes a Kensington camera, we are alerted that that vehicle is here. If we recover that vehicle, we then notify the Department of Justice that we've recovered it and remove it from the system. So I hope, I know it's kind of confusing with the number of phrases in police language about hot lists and such, but we don't generate our own hot lists.
Do we notify anyone that that vehicle has passed through our city, that it's been seen?
A vehicle that's wanted, that's police tactics, absolutely. If one of my uniformed officers had a vehicle that came up on a list, the first thing he would do is verify it on his phone, and he would notify dispatch, say, the XYZ vehicle has just passed me. That's how that process
That
works.
goes to the Department of Justice or?
None of that goes to anywhere unless we recover the vehicle. Or we do something with that car to take it off Department of Justice's roster of wanted vehicles.
Director Hassai, you had a.
Trying to think about what my question or comment was. I was listening so intently to what you were just saying now. I think you may have answered it with talking about how these lists work and how like corresponding jurisdictions, like for example, if El Cerrito and Kensington make an agreement to share, do we share Flock data or are we just both on Flock and that's it? I mean, we're not, you know, I understand how the lists are compiled and it was interesting though that if we got a hit on a vehicle, that would be ALPR data. So for example, we don't have to do anything, but it is captured by the camera. And would, for example, if a car was stolen in Oakland and it passed by a camera in El Cerrito and it passed by a camera in Kensington, that information isn't going anywhere because the fact of the matter is, you know, 2 minutes later it could be somewhere else. It's not really helpful. It's just all you know is that that stolen plate passed your jurisdiction, but it doesn't record that or ping it anywhere.
That's pretty accurate.
So it doesn't track it and tell the originating city who reported the crime that your suspect just passed Kensington.
Are you asking if the Flock system identifies a vehicle and then tells the ORI that the vehicle was in Kensington?
What's ORI?
Originating agency information? Sarge? Can you answer that?
So Flock does not communicate back to the originating agency. It would have to be their camera. What typically would happen would be if we get a hit on a stolen vehicle, so let's say with the Oakland scenario, that would report it to DOJ. That vehicle then passes by a camera in our jurisdiction or say El Cerrito, it gets matched against the DOJ's roster. Our agencies get an immediate notification. El Cerrito gets their notification, we get our notification. They most likely, depending on we're probably going to notify each other mutually, thinking that it's headed one way or the other in the hopes of trying to intercept the vehicle or trying to make each other aware that there's a, especially in the case of a homicide, carjacking, that important officer safety information's out there. So we don't have officers making unintended traffic stops without the support that they need. But the only way that Oakland would ever find out would be after it's removed from the DOJ system. They get a notification and DOJ mandates validations of our record keeping for stolen plates and stolen vehicles at the end of every month. But it's not, has nothing to do with Flock.
Right. And you may or may not tell Oakland, just depending on what happens. Like if it passes through, it doesn't really help Oakland a whole lot. But if it was stuck here, then of course,
If we recover, let's say it's a stolen vehicle and it gets dumped in Kensington. We would then recover it. We then pull it from the stolen vehicle system, which is a DOJ system. We often, as a courtesy, will reach out to the agency. Hey, you might want to let your victim know that we have their car so they can come get their car. The same courtesy that we would hope that if a Kensington resident's car is stolen, as has happened recently, that jurisdiction will notify us and or the registered owner of the vehicle to come collect their vehicle without incurring, tow expenses and other costs to the victim, and try not to re-victimize them further. But again, Flock is not a part of that, of how we connect with those agencies.
in some ways, it might be helpful for folks to think about Flock as kind of a translation platform. There's all this crazy data in DOJ, and Flock is making it user-friendly for the agencies and for them to actually use. But that's what their value add is, because otherwise, who knows how all this data out of DOJ would really be useful to people. But that's what I think of it as, kind of a very useful tool in taking an incredible amount of data, but then making it more applicable and practical in police work, actually on the streets.
Any other?
Another question for you, Chief. So data sharing has to come in as a request to you or to your designate. What if you got a request from, back to the ACLU recommendations. ACLU recommended local only sharing. However, what if you were asked to share data with another city in the state of California, maybe down south? I mean, does that happen? Will that be routine? How rare would that be?
Well, hopefully I can address this. Number one, I do not know what ACLU's definition of local is. Two, if the Los Angeles Police Department called us, and I know we wouldn't have a signed agreement with the Los Angeles Police Department to look at Flock data, because the odds of a car being involved in a crime in LA and then showing up in Kensington are slim to none. If they did and said, we believe that one of our suspect vehicles in a murder is in your city, we want to look at your Flock data, I would say, that's wonderful. Go through the process, fill out the application, send it over through Flock. We will approve it. And then you can query that license plate, but you're only going to get the last 30 days. That's how that would work. And they would determine whether or not that plate that they're looking for was in Kensington at any point in time. All of this information, similar information, could be viewed through the Department of Motor Vehicle without Flock ever being involved. So if the Los Angeles Police Department wanted to find a car, they could just query a DMV records request, look at a license plate and find out where the registered owner of that car is. Flock is just another way of providing data. What we really want to know is what cars are coming into the Kensington at 2 o'clock in the morning to cut off taxpayer catalytic converters, cause vandalism and crime. We want our officers to be alerted to those plates driven by suspects put into the system by other jurisdictions to say that car is a wanted car for these crimes. And I want our officers to say, start circulating the streets. Let me get some El Cerrito help up here to help us find this car before they commit a crime in our city. Very helpful in that area.
Sylvia?
And just to take the example that everyone's been talking about, the shocking, armed carjacking in Kensington, that was they came out of, I believe, may have been a stolen Kia. So if that Kia plate had registered on Flock, we would have been alerted to it, and that we may have, mounted a response that would have triggered something, especially since the camera would have said where it was or where it was going. And so that was a piece of information that, would have been helpful. So that's the kind of information that I think we are after in particular.
And to add to that, in that particular instance, if we'd had a plate and then run it, we may have learned that the vehicle was wanted. And then that jurisdiction would be able to tell us, we're actually working a robbery case on several individuals driving that very car. We would then say, well, great, now we have one too. Our case would get added to their case, and whatever jurisdiction prosecuted that case would be lumped into one big investigation. Right now, we don't have that ability to tie these cases together.
Any other thoughts? So from what I hear, the director saying we would be interested in approving this contingent upon modifications or corrections, if you will. So do I hear a motion to approve with that consideration?
Well, there's a few changes that I would like to propose that I think are very easy and we can do tonight based on some of the
Okay,
mistakes. And tell me if I got it right, but one change I'd like to put in the motion is that in section 426.3.1, subsection E, that we strike continually working with the custodian of records on the retention and destruction of ALPR data. And we make working with the custodian of records on the retention and destruction of ALPR data a new subsection F.
Yeah.
And then the existing subsection F should now be subsection G. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. I totally see that as those are two separate things that should have been separated and then was repeated. So that makes sense.
okay,
So again, the edit is that we strike that sentence starting with continually and section E. We make working with the custodian of records, that sentence should be a new section F, and the current section F should be retitled as section G.
okay. Any other modifications that? And
On page 5, I would like to suggest that first paragraph that says all ALPR data download server stored no longer than 1 year. I would like that to stay 30 days.
No.
Second paragraph.
I disagree. I think we need to be really clear that this is a separate process. And I think what we need to do is ask Ann and her colleague at BBK, the chief, Flock, whatever combination of people need to be clear about explaining that more clearly. I think there are two different things happening. I think our question is a little bit about, you're telling us that this is in case our agency would download this data to the server. We need to know if that's the actual correct explanation. If it is, it should be more clearly stated. So I don't think we should dictate what happens in this paragraph. I think we need to see it come back, this paragraph.
That's fine.
any other thoughts? I would agree with that because it is unclear as to what that sentence actually means with regard to downloading to a server. So,
And I've already forwarded the email to my colleague to ask him to explain how those two paragraphs are consistent.
I think we could hear her. That's fine.
I think I would just say to Ann that that's helpful, but I think explaining it to us is one thing. If it needs to be rewritten, we'll need to see draft language.
Well, no, I mean, explain, yes, to suggest edits.
Alex, you had,
Do you want me to make the motion?
yeah, are there any other?
Well, I think I would like if under 426.6, the very last sentence talks about the records release and maintenance policy. And on page 7, it also mentions the records maintenance and release policy. If in fact those two records maintenance and policies are the same, then I would like to see the civil code referenced in the first example as well. That's a question for the BBK expert. If that is the civil code records release and maintenance policy, then I would like to see it referenced on page 5 as well, under 426.6.
And let me clarify, maybe I have the chief clarify. We have a records maintenance and release policy in the police policy manual. So
Well, we talked about that too, the chief and I, and he may be able to bring that policy to us tonight, but in this particular instance, the policy referenced is the civil code, and that's our policy may follow the civil code. But I just want I want the reference to be in both places. And if you would like to explain that, that's very helpful.
I'm sure we can.
I printed it.
I'm sure we can make that modification with a few keystrokes.
okay. All right, with that in mind, do I have a motion based on those corrections to move approval of the policy?
I can make it if you want. All right, I make a motion that the Board of Directors adopt the policy before us with the following modifications, which we will need to see back before us and agree to. And those modifications are a correction on section 426.3.1 outlined by Vice President Aquino Fike, which is to, do I need to repeat all the changes? The changes to strike the second sentence and turn the third sentence into a new subsection F and renumber F to G to clarify the first paragraph on page 5 that begins with all ALP data downloaded to the server, in particular to understand which server they're referring to. And lastly, to reference the civil code for the records release and maintenance policy under 426.6. And that is the motion.
Seconded.
Okay. Now, do you want to call the roll?
Vice President Aquino Fike,
Yes.
Director Duggan,
Yes.
Director Hassai,
Yes.
Director Goff,
Yes.
and President Spath.
Yes. Okay, so approved contingent upon those corrections. All right, now going back to the actual purchase of the flock cameras and software.
I'm going to ask legal counsel to give her comments and recommendations because we presented a contract that was generated by Flock and legal counsel reviewed it and made a recommendation to go back to Flock and ask to use a template that typically would be more favorable for the district. So Ann, would you mind explaining the fact that we have not
Yeah.
received a response back from Flock yet, what your recommendation is?
Yeah, so I provided a template for all professional services agreements that can be used for this and any other ones that come forward that's very favorable to the public agency. And then we would just attach a scope of work and the billing rates and the payment schedule, et cetera. So what if you're comfortable with this, I would recommend that you approve the agreement or approve a contract with Flock for the purchase of this equipment, subject to excuse me, let me say, approve a contract in a form approved by the district council. And then that will also come back to you for information when we get it all finalized. Or if
Any
not,
comment?
if not, we can just just postpone it to the next meeting.
Any thoughts? No?
Of course, we have thoughts.
Sylvia?
I guess I would be okay with approving the amount and the equipment But the contract would still have to come back to us, subject to approval for it to be, subject to the approval of form by council. I'm fine with that because this is the standard practice. Ann Danforth did the same thing. She much preferred our template contract. If they don't agree, then we've got a bit of a problem and we'll have to work it out. So that's where they have to hammer out the form approved by council. But I would be okay with going forward this way upon further discussion.
Any other thoughts?
Just clarifying question. So if we do it the way that Anne suggests, are we essentially approving, sort of deferring our approval to her? So she approves or makes the modifications and then just brings it back to us later as an FYI, and there's no further vote by us? Is that I like less? I feel that we should see the revisions and approve it. The board should approve it.
I don't, because I trust that council will make sure that our interests are protected. And so if we had no problems with this, it will only be more favorable for us. I just would be okay with approving it, subject to form by council, which means she finalizes the final contract.
Okay, as long as the substance isn't changing and it's just, I guess, some of the terms that in the end are better for us anyway. Okay.
And maybe you could explain briefly some of the strengths and the pros of the template you've provided.
Well, it's like indemnification, insurance provisions, that kind of thing. It's nothing substantive.
Thank you.
So as I understand it, what we're proposing to approve is Ann going through and presenting a contract and that will be acceptable to us. And we accept her agreement on that. And secondly, we're approving the cost of the cameras and the 2-year agreement.
Right. So when it comes back to us, it will be executed, but we will see it for information, but it will be considered executed.
Be considered executed.
Yes.
Now, whether it's formally executed, it may or may not be, but essentially it will be. Okay, so do I hear a motion to that effect?
I think we need public comment, and I also
Right.
want to draw attention to the fact that in the billing schedule, our tax is not included, and I want to make sure that we think about that we're careful about how we're being taxed, because we have a Berkeley zip code and sometimes people get taxed Berkeley. We have an El Cerrito address right now and we are a Kensington agency. And so we should be subject to the taxes of Contra Costa County. And it just is an important piece to be wary of. As I looked at this today, it was one of the first times I thought, wow, we better really pay attention to how we're taxed. If we're taxed, we are a government agency, but I think we still get taxed. So that's just a message to the GM and to Karn about being careful about how we're taxed and what rate we're taxed at.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't want to be taxed based on the Berkeley tax structure. Anyways, so back to public comment. If there is any public comment here in the audience, anyone online? No? Okay. So do I hear a motion to approve going forward with Ann dealing with the contract and also the purchase as identified? Sylvia?
Yeah, I move that we approve the contract with Flock, subject to our general counsel putting it into the form that she recommends. Yeah. Is that sufficient?
I would think so. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Director Goff, I'll accept your second. All right. Linnell?
Yes.
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 Yes. The next item, I think we are tabling the discussion of the lieutenant's position, presumably till the February meeting. Is that correct?
It'll be brought back next month.
Okay. So let's move on to the proclamation for former police chief Ricky Howell. I don't know if I knew Ricky pretty well, and I'm sure Sylvia can also attest to that as well. I was very impressed with what he did for Kensington and the time that he put in, and frankly, he went into some positions that certainly he probably wasn't excited about, but he did his, I guess you could say, his duty, and all the way up to being the interim general manager, chief of police. So I think we certainly should honor him and with this proclamation. And I'm more than happy to read it. If that's okay with the chief, okay. So in memoriam, Ricky Howell, whereas it is with deep sorrow and heavy hearts that we, the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District Board of Directors, acknowledge the passing of our beloved member of our law enforcement family, former police chief Ricky Howell. Whereas Ricky Howell joined the Kensington Police Department in October 1997 and served with unwavering dedication until his retirement in December 2020, leaving an indelible mark on the community served. Whereas Ricky Howell's commitment to public service was exemplary, and he served the Kensington Police Department with distinction as an officer, master sergeant, captain, and interim chief of police, leaving a legacy of leadership and professionalism. Whereas Ricky's contribution to the Kensington Police Department was significant, and he will be remembered for his tireless efforts in maintaining the safety and well-being of citizens of Kensington. Now, therefore, it is resolved that the Kensington Police Protection and Community Service District Board of Directors expresses its profound gratitude for Ricky Howell's 23 years of dedicated service and his significant impact on the Kensington Police Department and the community at large. Be it further resolved that we stand united in honoring Ricky Howell's memory and contributions to the law enforcement profession, recognizing the sacrifices he made in the name of public safety. In witness thereof, we, the Kensington Police Protection and Community Service District Board of Directors, do hereby set our hands and cause the official seal to be affixed on January 11, 2024. And again, I would also like to express my deep appreciation for Ricky's work. In addition to being the police chief, he also served, as I mentioned, as the interim general manager, and he did a good job in that regard. So
I attended Ricky's funeral. I want to express my appreciation to Chief Gankaz and the police department for honoring Ricky with their presence and their escort. There were many people from Kensington that were there, and I also am, sorry that his life and his retirement were cut short. He definitely he loved Kensington. He really believed in the department and the service we could provide if we, were able to continue to elevate the professionalism of the department. And he was an avid hunter and fisherman. If you didn't know that, that's something you could know about him. We had great conversations about particular hunting dogs, some of which I was interested in, and a voracious reader. He had 3,000 books in his home. His mother is not looking forward to having to deal with the books. And he also was a good cook, which is one thing I did not know about him. So I appreciate the support of the community and the police department honoring Ricky. And that's all. Thank you.
any other thoughts? Anyone online? No? Okay, well, again, really appreciate the chief and his work to bring this to our attention and attendance at his funeral.
Good evening. Good evening again. The document that the board signed will be framed and sent to Ricky's mom.
Oh, thank you.
And it was very nice to see a turnout from the district, former board members, esteemed members here in the room and members of the public. So it was a pretty good turnout.
And folks might be interested to know that Ricky was very close to former Chief Garfield's family, who unfortunately couldn't attend at the last minute. But Chief Garfield's brother spoke on his behalf. Former Officer Kevin Huey was there, and other members of both former police and fire boards. So yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. The next item is a discussion and additional direction on the progress of the new police building. General Manager Randa.
So, in my staff report, I'm making recommendations and suggestions. The architect that's familiar with the property that would be willing to come up and discuss with individuals and look at the actual building site has stated that he's willing to come, or he's able to come up on January 22nd at 1 p.m. So if the two directors on the building committee could be there, that would be great. And we can get started on talking to him about possibly a rendering. And talking to him, the architect, and in talking to the geotechnical engineer would prefer that there's at least some direction on where the building is going to be placed or looked at being placed on the parcel. So there is a need as we move forward for the board to probably look at, and hopefully at February's meeting, there'll be more information on cost involved in both to do these two things. But in conjunction with that, looking and applying for various grants is an ongoing subject. And as we'll mention in the hazard mitigation plan, it's key in looking at FEMA grants for the building. And that's going to keep on progressing. I failed to mention about surveying the parcel. I think that's important to do as quickly as possible. And then
But that has been done. The survey of the park parcel?
it's been done, but how do we know where the markings are?
Well, talk to the surveyor. We've spent lots of time and money surveying that.
Okay, so if we find that surveyor, they would restake it, I guess is what I'm saying.
I guess if they haven't put, what do you call those things? Benchmarks or whatever, but yes, they should. I don't know that they ever staked it. They surveyed it. It may, if it needs to be staked, they may not have been asked to do that, but they did survey it.
And I say the staking because I think it's very important for people to have a visual of what we're talking about. And then at some point in time, because of the time frame involved in permitting, that's important as well to start moving forward with as quickly as possible. I think it's important to note we attached some work that Ann Suprell did from Best and Krieger in conjunction with having a discussion with Ann Danforth, because there was the question asked about the property being usable based on some prior bond issues and votes and such. Her answer is in the memo attached in the board packet, but today I had a question about the wording of the ballot itself, and we're doing a little more investigation on that wording to see if that creates an issue with the use of that property. I also had an email discussion with the head of county planning, who provided me with the zoning and a little bit of what would be involved in moving forward with the project.
Could I add something to that, Mr. Aranda? I looked back at the email that I have from Ann Danforth. Now, I haven't seen that the ballot language myself, and if we can find it, I'd like to see it. But she did say that the ballot measure that went to the voters specified that the district would use the proceeds for acquiring the park. And when she was asked in public meetings whether that language would prevent use of the site for a new public safety building, she said, I answered that I would have to research the issue and that we might need to consult with a specialist. Then she said, by the way, I later did some preliminary research on the topic and found nothing that would prevent the district from locating an administrative building in the park. So that was her initial research. And I will look at it myself and, and give you my opinion, but that's what she found.
Sylvia?
I have a question that relates, it's for Ann Saprell, and it relates to the start of a new term with a new president. In the past, we've had to reappoint committees, and the committee that Alex and Sarah were on around the kind of building committee, I think may have completed their work in identifying a site. And so I think the question is, do we keep a committee, or do we then now involve like, for example, have a special meeting with this gentleman to discuss a rendering, or do we appoint a new ad hoc committee or a new committee? I mean, an ad hoc has a beginning and an end and a purpose, and that, I think, they accomplish their purpose. So, I think we should consider whether we have a special meeting to take input on a rendering, or that the architect talk to all 5 board members separately to avoid Brown Act complications, to get their thoughts about that. So I'd like to propose maybe a different way of going forward on the 22nd, or going forward at all with more input from more board members, but not in a way that violates the Brown Act. And I don't know anything about the committees, and I mean, if this is practice or this is, kind of a rule, but we would always reappoint in January.
But it's not on the agenda, is it?
But relates.
But relates to this,
No,
yeah.
of course, we cannot do that right now. So my question is this ad hoc committee still in force? Because we've changed presidency, we've come to a new year. This is the practice we've had in the past, is to reappoint committees. And that's one question. Secondly, is the ad hoc committee still in force because they have accomplished their objective? And, how do we go? I mean, we can't appoint committees today, but this relates to the question of how do we proceed with the architect? I mean, David's suggestion was the ad hoc committee members could meet with him. Well, I guess my question is, do we really still even have an ad hoc committee if they've reached their objective? And should we be reappointing committees in January with a new president, as we have done in the past?
Well, you should be reappointing every year the committees.
Okay,
but since it's not on the agenda for this meeting, and this is the January meeting, so if you want to go forward and meet with the architects, I would just do it 2 at a time, just do, or individually, but you could meet, 2 members with the architect at a time.
Well, let me go ahead and, Alexis.
So I actually disagree, Director Hasai. The last report of the committee was that we were narrowing down to that site, but we never formally made a recommendation that be the actual site. So my hope was that the committee would be reappointed and get some more information. I don't think we've even finished phase 2 of the geotech. So I still think I still think this committee needs to complete its work. We're very close, I agree. And then then it's really done, but I still think there's some work to do. I'd like to make a formal recommendation to the board as a member of that committee, but I leave it up to the president whether we are reappointed.
Well, right now, we don't have it on the agenda, so reappointing it is, can't be done tonight. I guess, is that a formal policy in the policy procedures manual, or is it just a rule of thumb?
I would have to look. I think it may be. And also suggested that reappointing every year with a new president is appropriate as well, or reappointing every year. I guess lastly, my request then would be that more board members have the ability to speak to the architect prior to a rendering being done.
Well, I'll go ahead. Duggan.
So I also want to raise the question as to whether we're going to be speaking to more than one architect. I would think we'd want to interview 3 and get different bids, or am I not clear about the process?
Yeah, the concept here is not hiring of an architect for the actual building. The thought process was to try to get started with this individual's under, this individual's thoughts and recommendations of a possible rendering based on the fact that he has a history with that site because their firm did a project on a proposed building that would have housed both fire and police at essentially that site. And in my discussions with him, he is a very strong proponent of not just a police building per se, but an improvement to the overall quality of this area. In other words, making the park also stand out in conjunction with the building. And now, if you ask me what kind of suggestions he has, I don't know yet. I think that's what the discussion is. But I also want to emphasize that as important as this project is, that the initial meeting with him for some ideas will probably give us something to work off of for the entire board to consider, both from a pricing standpoint and from a design standpoint. But when it comes time, if that time comes to move forward with an actual hiring of an architect and engineer for a building, we're just not going to randomly pick someone. Yeah.
Go ahead, Sylvia.
Is this, are we paying for this rendering?
No, well, will we pay for the rendering? Probably, yes. That's what I just said, is that after we meet with him, it'll come back to the board on what the board wants to do and how much it's going to cost to do that. But he strongly recommends a rendering, and if I'm not mistaken, Director Sarah can also elaborate on this for the benefit of having discussions in a community setting to have something visual.
Sarah.
Yeah, I think that's the gist. I mean, we're sort of in this, chicken and egg, where do you start? But in order to get to a place where something could be brought before the full board to approve or not, whether or not we have to have some initial conversations with someone about creating a concept in a specific location. And in order for Mallory, let's say, because he's familiar with the site, to come and then suggest a price for that sort of general concept that we can then bring to the board for approval, a couple people need to sit down with him and give him an idea of what we'd be thinking. But if the board approves, so say just 2 of us met with them initially to express sort of general parameters, and this is generally what the thought is, then he would write a proposal, bring it back to us. The board would then have to look at it and approve it. And then as part of that process of creating the rendering, I think that would be an appropriate time to open it up to all the board members, the community, to just kind of chime in with their thoughts and comments and maybe some hopes and dreams of what it may look like or what we should consider. So it doesn't have to all happen in that January 22nd meeting. But obviously no payment is going to happen or agreement to do it without approval from the full board. But I'm ambivalent. I'm happy to have, happy for the full board, everyone to have a say earlier on the 22nd, but it's not totally essential because he wouldn't be starting his work. It's just to give a rough idea of, so he can create a proposal for us to bring to the board. And then from there, we can all work to get, and then at that point, it is just an idea. And then it really does come before the board to say, okay, yes, we're going to vote to pursue this and hire an architect via RFP and all of that whole process, right?
Yes.
So what is the name of this person we're talking about?
His firm is called Mallory.
It's Ross Kusenberry, I believe his name.
Okay.
Okay, that would have been nice to start with. And are we paying him to do a drawing? So when you say rendering, do you mean a drawing? What do you mean? And also, I just want to strongly state, this community has said they don't want the rest of the park encroached upon for the police station. I want, just from what I've heard from others and, Save Kensington's Future, who got us elected, we had signatures from, huge part of the community saying they did not want the police to encroach upon the park. So I would just like to say, I don't want a concept that involves more of the park. I want.
No,
that's
an
not-
entrance-
That wasn't my intention.
Yeah, I want an entrance on the Arlington
Right.
and a building which is, wholly self, contained with its own parking that exits only onto the Arlington. I just want to say that I'm just getting nervous with the idea of
Yeah.
concepts and
Director Duggan, may I just interrupt and clarify? I know what General Aranda was saying, and it wasn't about encroaching further on the park or anything like that, but is there a way that this building at that site could improve access to the park or improve,
I don't,
accessibility to the park, not in a way that's encroaching, but actually allows more citizens to access it via a little,
however, that is dangerous, as, as many citizens said when we discussed having the police in the parking lot. There's a danger of police vehicles going in and out. I
No.
personally
I,
strongly feel that, the exit and entrance for the police should be separate and should not provide access to any other part of the park.
I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves on this. Go ahead, Sylvia.
Just one last thing. I understand why we're using Ross Kusenberry because they had this experience on, they designed one concept for that site. But we are kind of starting down a road with one particular firm. And, I would, for example, would like to see, maybe more than one concept, maybe you really start with 3 firms and you talk about what you want. That's what we did with the building. There were 3 proposals, for the renovation of the community center. And if you're sort of putting your thumb on the scale with one. And I understand that we need a concept, but we really need more than one concept. We need maybe 3 concepts to bid on it. And then you pick the winner based on the kind of concept and plans. So I don't know. I'm a little concerned about going with one, but I think we just have to really, once you get a concept, then what? Is that the concept we have to then bid out, or do we throw open more? If the concept is we want a building with its own parking, blah, blah, blah. And I understand what you're saying about how does this, work together with the entire site? Director Duggan doesn't want to see an entrance going that way. Some people might want an entrance that way. Maybe we need to see, 3 designs or whatever. I'm a little concerned about focusing on this one firm just because they have this experience. I'm a little concerned. I wish I was not around for the very beginning of the community center process. I came in, it was already kind of underway, but there had been 3, I did come to the presentation by 3 architectural firms with 3 different concepts before we chose one. So.
Yeah.
Also, as I was saying to David earlier today, we have the modular building, and one proposal I'd like to see would be the cost of simply creating the space for the modular building and adequate parking as a possible cost savings.
Alex.
I want to apologize for any confusion here. I think there is a great deal of confusion right now. And so I take responsibility with Sarah. But what we're talking about is, and we actually heard from the county, we've heard from other professionals that this is such a complex project that in order for this board to even approve the idea of building on the hill and getting a cost, somewhat of a range of a cost, we have to get a drawing, a rendering. It is not the final drawing of the building. We definitely need to do an RFP and get a competitive bidding process to decide the final design. This is just to come back to you with a concept, an idea, and ask this board, do you or do you not want to proceed down this pathway of building on this site? And again, I really apologize for any confusion, but that is all we're asking for. Yes, we would pay this professional. I think given the fact that we've heard from the county that this is a very long and intensive process, and we just need to get going. We don't even have any approvals in place to get going. So we need to just get an idea. And then again, it's not final. It's just to get the board's approval of whether we want to go down this path.
Cass?
So I would just like that person to also put together a concept, including the modular.
Again, we are too early for that. Well, all we're asking for is, the approval. We want to come back to you all with a recommendation and say, do you, the board, approve us going down the pathway of designing a building, or maybe looking into the modular option? But first, we need to have an idea of what it could look like on that site. Modular or not, but we actually need to bring you something to look at. Right now, there's no detail, no.
Let's hear first.
There would be a big,
Sylvia.
oh, sorry.
This is really a preliminary to the preliminary step. I mean, it's so generic in a way. It really is to see where a building could go, because we need to know that in order to even do the phase 2 geotech analysis. They need to have a good sense of where the building would very likely go. In order to do that, we have to give an architect some rough parameters, this many square feet. These are sort of the basic requirements. The chief will give input, just bare bones. Where could it be, so that we can come back to the board and the community and say, okay, yay or nay, we're going to go down this path further. But does not commit us to working with it. And I felt very much the same. I really would like to have options and really explore some great design ideas. And I don't want to be held too closely to anyone. And I think we need to have options on the table. This is really just to get us to the next step. There's no avoiding, or rather it would be in my opinion, and I don't want to speak for others, but a big mistake to try to come to this board to ask us to approve moving forward without any kind of rough concept of where and if this building can go here.
Sylvia first and then.
Okay, so I think what you're talking about is something maybe more along the lines of what we were showing when we were considering the parking lot, or maybe expanding parking over there. So I get that. So it's not going to be this beautiful drawing of what this building could look like. I do think it's important that we cost out and think about the modulars, and here's why. Because we posed that a lot. We talked about that a lot when we got the modulars. Now, I can see a much better reasoning for going forward with the building, because we need to build for the next 50 years, not the next, 10. So we can start making that argument now, but I do think it's not fair to us in the community after we talked so many times about, well, these modules are a great idea because we could move them, and then to completely throw that off the table without even considering it. So I think that should be part of the discussion. I suppose the rendering, there may be different considerations for those two things, one being modulars and one being a new site, so I think that might be something to discuss with them. Would the siting or the conceptual drawings be any different with those two options?
Alex?
Point taken, and definitely willing to talk to this firm that's going to do the rendering. I do really want to underscore something that Director Goff said, which I should have highlighted earlier, and I hope this board understands it. We cannot finish phase 2 of the geotechnical survey without having a more clear idea of where the building could go, the square footage. Basically, we need some idea of what this building how much space it would take and where it would be. And that is the purpose of this rendering, so that we can finish phase 2. So I really hope that the board will let us continue with this work.
Thank you.
Yes.
So how much are we going to pay for this concept? And don't we need an approval for that?
That's what I keep on saying. We're not there yet. We've got to meet with someone. They've got to come back to us and tell us what the cost is, what the concept is. All I'm trying to do
So
is
what we
just
are doing.
get
so
us
far
off
is
the dime here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what parameters are you giving this architect? Are you asked, I mean, I just would have liked to have been asked to contribute to that,
And this-
that question.
I-
Most affordable, easiest access, least slope. I mean, what are the parameters?
The
Sarah,
parameters will be enlarged upon or discussed after he comes and looks at the property and throws out his professional ideas. That's the
Sarah.
way I look at it.
So my read of the situation right now is that maybe the best approach is to have each of the board members speak with Mallory or be present in some ways, Director Hassayed said, because I think that there's a lot of interest in sharing of opinions. So my feeling is that in the spirit of cooperation and everyone being able to participate, that all board members should be able to speak with Mallory.
I mean, that's fine. In fact, you've convinced me otherwise because this is what I think is the most important is the square footage. I'd like to know square footage that we're at now and the square footage we're going to be asking, because I gather we might be asking for even more than we have currently.
We're at 2,800 for the portables. So the idea is that it would be 3,000 or under.
3,000
Or under.
or under. Okay.
Sorry.
What did you say, sir?
2,800 currently for the portables is what our current square
But I've
footage is.
used 3,000.
Yeah,
Right,
and
that's why I
so
got
we're
that.
not looking, yeah,
Okay.
so 3,000 is the max.
All right. And so this is really about citing and about square footage. So that's fine. I don't need to be part of that. I'm okay with that personally. I think we still, I understand what's going to come back to us. If you remember the drawings that came from blanking on his name already about that's what we're looking at. So this is not even going to be a beautiful picture. So I personally am fine with that. Thank you for the explanation.
well, let me ask a couple of questions and before I go. Okay, so first of all, do we have a committee to go forward? Based on what we discussed previously, is that we have to recreate the committee.
That's a question for Ann.
Oh,
Well, it is,
okay.
but it does bear upon this January 22nd meeting, because either have a committee or you don't have a committee. And if you
Yeah.
don't have a committee at this point in time, then no one can attend that January 22nd meeting. The second thing is that if indeed we either do it as an extension of the committee, then we extend it, and then they come back to the board, to me, it would make more sense if the general manager had the discussions with Ross and Kuzenberry, and he comes to the board and discusses his ideas or his thoughts on placement of a facility on the site. And at the same time, we have to decide where that placement is going to be, where we would want it to be. And maybe if that's not feasible, where it needs to go, because
My comments to that as an ad hoc committee hasn't been disbanded, so I made the assumption that it was still in place, even though
Yep.
there was a change of presidents.
Yeah, okay. So in the time, in the time since this first came up, I looked at the policy and policy 4020.1 addresses temporary advisory committees, and they are appointed by the president. They don't have to be approved by the board. It says they can be. The board president appoints any temporary advisory committees, and the time allowed to accomplish that purpose shall be outlined at the time of appointment. A temporary committee shall be considered dissolved when either its purpose has been accomplished or when the time frame for its existence has expired, whichever occurs first. So
it doesn't mean that it doesn't have to be agendized, that
no,
I can, as president, extend the committee.
if
for
it even needs to
purpose.
be, if it even needs to be extended. I don't know what the parameters were when it was first formed, but if there was no time frame placed on it, then it would exist until its purpose has been accomplished.
And Sarah indicates that it was an 18-month period.
Yeah, it was whether the objectives, if the objectives achieved or 18 months, whichever is first, and you can find the documents on the KPPCSD committee website.
Okay. And
So, go ahead, Cass.
And what exactly were the objectives? I can't remember if it was finding a site. Or, I mean, I do think there is sort of some debate as to whether, the committee should be done at this point or should keep going.
The committee isn't the agenda item.
Cass.
So, I mean, I think legal counsel just mentioned it. We're trying to clarify that we can move forward. So the second part of your comment is, as the general manager, I would prefer to have the committee members that I started working with there, because I believe that 3 people expressing thoughts to this individual, and also 3 people recollecting what his comments are, is better than just me by myself.
Sylvia.
I mean, that's fine, but I read here that it says that the board and the the staff are going to be focused on this one site. So until I hear otherwise, we have chosen a site to pursue. Now, it could be that we have to change that because we discover something about this site. But anyway, I'm fine with the proposal as it is, which is a select number of people provide information. It's mostly about square footage and siting. I don't need to be part of it.
Cass, one last comment, if you don't mind.
I would like to read a bio of this individual and see some examples of his work. He was chosen, without the participation of the board, which I just feel uncomfortable about.
You can come by the office and I'll give you the project that was presented to the fire board a few years ago.
I mean,
I know.
I think we discussed this at a previous meeting.
Right.
So I don't think maybe you weren't focused on the name of the firm, but I do remember discussing it. And yes, I do know about the firm because I know about their work, but I think that was already mentioned. It's the name of the firm is not a surprise to me.
Right, it was discussed previously, and this individual and the company itself does have experience that I think is useful in going forward. Now, yes.
I just want to
Need a
mention,
motion?
Mr. President, that there's a public member that's been waiting.
Okay,
And I understand it's been a director discussion, but at some point there is a person on the public waiting.
well, let me just say, I guess I do also have the authority to continue this committee as president, so I don't think it has to be agendized. I think that I can just say the committee should continue as it was designed. It has an 18-month period and we're still within that period, so it will continue as such. We have a member of the public. John?
Yes, good evening. What you've been talking about is that the district has to come up with a program, which means that you go to the architect with all the issues and your wants, what you want the building to do and what it has to do. It has to have so much parking. It has to accommodate so many police. It has to have access to Arlington. You need to outline those things to give to the architect for them to give you some idea of how that could be sited wherever it's going to go. You need to give them direction to do that. That's what you're starting to talk about now. You have to outline that for the architect, and then they will add their ideas. The other thing is that be careful when you keep referring to a rendering because people will fixate on that, especially if it is a computer generated image. People will take that as fact rather than as a rough. And so you will always be fighting against that image when the building, if it comes to fruition, actually gets built. It will most likely be very different than that initial rendering, and you'll have to put up with that all the way through the process. So I would caution you about talking about a rendering. You're really talking about very, very early schematics and how what you need would be cited on the location you're talking about and how it fulfills hopefully everybody's requests and what the police department needs. On another matter, since I heard something that got me, I know several people, several directors have been elected by Save Kensington's Future, but you have to realize you are now representing all of Kensington, and so your outlook has to be a lot broader than just the people who got you elected. But those are my comments. Very interesting discussion. I know it's going to take a lot of work. So good luck. Thank you.
Thank you, John. One more comment. Ally?
Danielle.
Oh, Danielle.
I just wanted to quickly respond to John's comments and really good points, John. Thank you so much.
Where's my mute? Sorry.
Danielle, I think is Danielle?
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, I agree with John. I think it's a good idea to just understand that this is a very preliminary step and that any drawing that is rendered is going to be remembered, just like I remembered what was rendered for the fire department's proposal. And that's what stuck in my head. The one thing I was thinking was, I don't know if you want to go back to crop really quick and ask what part of the parcel is the best to develop on, if he has a geotechnical opinion about that. I mean, in my mind, it's just closest to the Arlington front rather than closer to the park itself, since it's flatter and or, close to the Arlington. So wide versus and shallow versus long and back. That might be a quick question you can ask crop. Just a thought.
Any other comments? So do we have direction to give? Oh, Sylvia, I'm sorry. Sylvia? Yeah.
Hi. I want to pile on with John and Danielle. They're absolutely right. You show people a visual and it's going to be burned into their brains. So be careful about that. But that's not why I called in. I just wanted to call in to remind you that a year ago when you created this committee, it's called this is January 2023, the District Office Permanent Location Committee is the name of it. It's not a building committee, as someone called it tonight. And it says that the committee will dissolve once a permanent location has been voted on by the full board or no later than 18 months from the committee formation date if no location has been approved. Okay, and the committee's final recommendation as to location, that was the charter, will be presented in a public board meeting. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Sylvia. Sylvia.
My comment is just to make sure folks here don't know, Danielle Madugo is no longer just a informed and engaged citizen. She's now the newest member of the Kensington Fire Protection District Board, appointed by the Board of Supervisors today. So we will have a new colleague to be working with. Congratulations to us and to Danielle.
Well, let me just say too, with regard to the rendering, it strikes me as a couple of things. One, we will have to make some decision as to where this facility will be located on the site. And then secondly, crop will have to do its work before we even get a rendering, because we need to, we need to understand whether we can build on the site. If there is a earthquake fault, for example, running through that site, then it is not really buildable.
Guys, respond.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so crop, we asked, because again, this is the chicken and the egg thing. We need this second phase, but we don't want to commit to the site or the building type until we know if we can actually, the geotech report is good and the phase two. But crop said that you really have to have a basic idea of the sort of building and the location for the building on the site in order to do the phase two of the geotech. And that the phase two of the geotech, as I said in the last meeting, I believe, is very, based on the phase one analysis, very unlikely to contradict or change the final conclusion about the buildability of the site, but rather really inform more specific things around grading and drainage and foundations required and that sort of thing. But Crop, the geotech, encouraged and advised us to first pursue this rough concept picture, render, whatever we're going to call it, so that we can do the phase two. So this is the only next step we can take if we want to move this ball further down the road or court or whatever the expression is. There's nowhere else for us to take this without this next bit of information.
Bit of information being where on the site it would go and what it would look like.
A meeting with someone to be able to provide a rough concept and location recommendation on the site. That has to be the next piece in order then to take that to Crop, the geotech, to do the phase two, and then to say yay or nay, we're definitely going to proceed and would like to get.
Right. I just one question whether you need a rendering or whether you say that we need 3,000 square feet and it would be placed on the north side of the.
I think that's where this is coming from. Rendering has a very specific
Right.
sort of meaning in architecture. And I think this is more like a site plan or a schematic. And I think that's where some of that confusion came. So I think we're probably not looking for
Some
rendering.
kind of graphic with the bare bones parameters, which will in effect include more than just square footage because we have to account for the X number of spaces for police parking and certain other bare minimum requirements. So that is part of the discretion of the architect to present a concept. So whether it wouldn't obviously be a detailed rendering, it would be some graphic or schematic or what have you, very rough, and allowing us to cite it.
Or it could be, well, potentially just could be a footprint. This is what a footprint would look like on that site without anything further. I mean, you wouldn't have to show how high it is or how wide it is and so forth. That
Except that I would think that of significance to board members when they're deciding about whether or not they want to pay or vote to proceed is to have a sense of, okay, due to the slope of the site, does this have to be a two-story building? If so, does that two-story building block views from the park? If so, so there's a bit more information I think that we're going to need, but the goal is really not to get too specific, to just get what we need to be able to take it to the next phase. Because I think it does have an impact on whether or not people support the idea of the site.
I would encourage people to think back to the plans we presented. If you remember, like in the parking lot, or if you were going to add some parking over here, it was black lines and but they show different examples. The building could go this way, the building could go that way. That's what they'll be able to do based on the site, based on our requirements. They will probably be able to provide a couple of depending on the site may be very limited in where we could go, or it may offer two options. That's what we're looking at. So I think that was a bit of a confusion over the terminology. I think we're looking at a site plan or a schematic, but we're not looking at 3D or even 2D.
right. That's the way I interpret it. Oh, okay. So let's try to one last, and that's it.
I personally would just like to state that we very much thank Alex and Sarah for their hard work in finding a location. But to me, the purpose of the committee has been met. And I want to make sure that you understand that you really don't have a mandate to choose a building. You had a mandate to choose a site.
No, I don't think that's the interpretation, Cass. Everything has to come back to the board. It'll be a set of recommendations at most, or just information for that matter. So anyways,
Have to clarify that because that's factually incorrect, Director Duggan. We never made a final recommendation of the final site. I would like the opportunity to make that recommendation to this board. It is up to this board to take it or leave it. But I don't believe the committee has made its final recommendation. If the president wants to disband this committee, it's within his discretion, but the committee has not fulfilled its obligation, and I'm very happy to finish my obligation if
I agree. I'm just saying that's the mandate. Find a, certify the location, give your recommendation.
all right.
I love these.
Okay, all right. So we're not at that point yet, and I would want the committee to continue in its present form. And I would also like to get direction from the board in the form of a resolution or direction to the general manager to move forward as he's proposing.
I think that the IGM has made recommendations. I think maybe we need to change the word rendering to something like site plan or schematic in order to also have the architect come back with a proposal that reflects what we really want to see and how much money we're willing to spend. We don't really need a rendering per se, or I think it's more of a site plan or schematic. And so if we change that word, I think that helps. And I think this is the first, number one is really where we're at. We're not on to anything else yet. I mean, so basically you want to proceed, but we're really talking about number one right now.
But if some of us meet with the architect and the terminology is fine, however we want to do that. I would hope there's the possibility of either the February or the March meeting that we may contract with him or we may not, based on the discussion that the board has. But parallel to that, we also may want to approve the second phase of the geotechnical study. And my personal opinion is that I believe it's very important to have that specific parcel staked so that there's no misunderstanding of the full parcel. And then what would happen is when an actual site on the parcel is determined, you would go back and stake that area. We're not anywhere near that yet. That's what I'm trying to move things along, I guess, is what I'm trying to do.
Okay, so do I hear from any of the board members consistent with what David has just said, moving forward in that direction? So are we all comfortable with that?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right, then let's move forward with David's recommendation, and the two board members who are in the existing committee will meet on the 22nd with David and with the architect, Ross Kusenberry. Okay?
Question, is the police chief going to be at that meeting? Because I think, does he need to be at that meeting? Will the police chief be joining you for that meeting?
Yeah, I plan on him.
Okay.
I was gonna wait until,
I just want to make sure that they're part of the meeting.
yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Chief.
I just want to say one more thing. I really would like to see, similar to what the architect showed us for the parking lot, there were 5 different options of sites, and, that kind of a site plan or schematic, I think would be really helpful. And, relative costs. Is that what we're going to be getting?
I can't answer the question until I meet with him. And then I am very hopeful that at our February 8th meeting, we can have a broader discussion to answer those questions.
I would assume that that is going to be the case and the outcome of your meeting on the 22nd, hopefully.
Well, given the fact that I've been able to give my input and hopefully you will have listened, I feel comfortable moving forward.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll move forward. Cass, you would like a 5-minute break? Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break. Reorganization, RFP that was, put out, and we had one contractor who agreed, to put in a proposal. And as you recall, I believe it was the last meeting that, we approved, Ridgeline. And then that was contingent upon the fire district board approving, the Ridgeline proposal. However, that did not occur, as we know now, and so we're sort of in a period of abeyance, not knowing what's going to transpire, particularly at their meeting next week. And Ridgeline has indicated that they are pulling out or intend, well, at least they don't want to
I can
participate.
I can update you.
Okay. At least on the surface from what we know now, and David will update us on the issue.
Yeah. So, the email, made me think, and I had a few conversations with Dimitri about his concerns. But I did speak to, Mary, the general manager for the fire district today. And she is hopeful that, this item will be brought back on the board agenda next week. And that Dimitri will be an active participant and still be willing to accept moving forward with the proposal if the board votes to approve it. unfortunately, there's other issues. Mary is, in speaking to Mary, she has a mother that's ill. And so she's given her notice with the fire district as their general manager. And then my understanding is Director Nagel is going to be stepping down after this board meeting. So there will be the need again, based on a 4-person board, to appoint a 5th member. So I'm sure we're all hopeful that the fire board will give this RFP some consideration next week. And it would be nice to see it move forward.
When you say that Ridgeline, Demetrius will participate in the meeting, he's willing to attend and respond to.
I can't speak for, I think he's willing to be on Zoom and he's willing to accept the proposal if it's approved.
Okay, that's different than what the board had intended to do with regard to Dimitri's or Ridgeline's participation in the upcoming fire board meeting. So anyways, if it goes that way, then that's fine as far as I'm concerned. Any other thoughts? So, well, my recommendation.
Just say I'm pleased that Dimitri is still willing to consider taking the project if it gets approved, and I hope that it does.
Well, then I suggest that we just wait to see what happens on next Wednesday. And I'm sorry to see Larry leave, but yeah, so yeah, okay. Moving on, discussion on this local hazard mitigation plan. I'll let you start, David, and if you want me to interject anything, let me know.
This board agenda item is really specific for 2 reasons. One is to make sure the board is okay with promoting a town hall discussion on February 8th prior to our board meeting at 7. And it's the main reason for the town hall meeting is to try to help the community understand the importance of the overall hazard mitigation plan. But I think even more importantly, to understand the projects that we're submitting and what it takes to get those projects moved through, which involves approval of the plan and then going after FEMA grants primarily is what revolves around these plans. So in the packet, we've given the board some information. If the board members have thoughts about those plans that really Director Spath primarily was involved in, he took them from the existing mitigation plan, which is about to expire. Well, I guess it has expired.
Yeah.
And then a discussion of some additional plans separate from what we have. The fire board is also working on their plan as well. So there's some communication and some cooperation in regard to all that. So that when we get with the county and the contractor, there's some consistency in what appears as the final plan. But again, it's very important at some point, and I received a call and an email this week because the county is really pushing to get this done so that it's approved. We would bring a resolution back to the board for that approval, and then we're good to go in submitting FEMA grants.
Sylvia.
A couple of things. It would be great if the town hall meeting included fire and police districts because the plans are similar. It's the same topic. I was planning on requesting a closed session item for our next meeting. So February 8th is our next meeting date, right? The first is the first on a Thursday and the 8th is the second Thursday. So we're supposed to meet regularly on February 8th, our next meeting.
Yeah.
So if that's at 6 o'clock, I don't know how you're planning on having that town meeting, if that's something you're going to be leading or the police are going to be leading or, but. All right, I mean, it's 6 o'clock is, if you're having a town hall meeting for residents, 6 PM is not a great time for many people. I'll just put that out there. And if we have a closed session, I don't know that you have to be there for that. So if you're leading it, then it may be okay. We don't have to be there, right? It's a town hall, not a special meeting. And then only other comment I have about the plans is, and I don't know if it belongs here or it's just something to think about, but in addition to wildfire dangers and seismic issues with the increasing kind of temperatures that come with climate change, we may want to think about whether there's anything to be done in any way that relates to a cooling center. That might be something to consider incorporating into these plans. Whether it's this building or the rec building having any kind of, or the annex having any kind of a cooling possible function. So those are my comments.
And I mean, certainly we could add another element before we submit the final.
I mean, if it's appropriate here, great. If it's not, it's just something to think about.
Any other, Sarah?
So to clarify, as of now, that February 8th town hall before our meeting does not include the fire districts? It wouldn't be a joint town hall, or it would be?
I've shared with Mary that date and time, and that was fine with her. I don't know, I don't think Mary knew yet whether, based on their agenda item next week, if their board feels that that needs to be a posted meeting for the fire board, or if they're comfortable with maybe doing what we're doing here, is presenting what our plans are to the board in advance and getting your comments. Because if more than 2 of our board members show up at that meeting, you're going to have to be silent. And that would be true of the fire district as well.
Yeah, I mean,
They may not want to be, is what I'm
Mhm.
saying.
I think it'd be useful if they attended, because as you'll see, a couple of these project proposals are joint proposals with the fire district. One is coordination and the other is sharing the cost of these emergency warning systems.
But when you say they, you mean like the staff of the fire board as opposed to members of the board per se?
In attendance, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would prefer it to be a joint public meeting now.
Oh.
I mean, that would be most useful because of the overlap on some of these projects, and we're talking about, in many respects, the same hazards that we're trying to address.
Right, I'm just trying to clarify. You don't mean that both boards should be in attendance?
No.
That they, both agencies should be, yeah, I agree.
Right. It reflects what both agencies are proposing to do with regard to local hazard mitigation planning. Do we have someone online? Lynn?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm horrified that you guys are planning a town hall meeting without. This is the first I've heard of it. If it's February 8th, it should go into the February outlook. So, I mean, I would really appreciate it if, when you're planning public meetings, that you would talk to me about it, and somebody write a little article and somebody say something to me that you're having a meeting that you expect the public to attend. The outlook is the major way that people learn about any of these things.
Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate that. I think part of the problem was timing with this, and getting it all together. It was a very short time frame, particularly with regard to the county's insistence on putting information out. So, but your point is well taken.
Do we still have time to get it in the February Outlook?
Yeah, if you give me something.
Okay.
What's the deadline?
Well, the deadline is passed, but you can give me, if you can give me something by Monday, say, that would be very helpful.
Okay, well, again, the fire board won't be meeting until Wednesday, so we won't know exactly what their preference is. I think, well, let's chat and see what we want to put in.
Okay.
Should we make the decision tonight whether or not we will definitely hold the meeting irrespective of the fire board's involvement on that date? Like, should we commit to the date from our perspective, no matter what, for FEMA grant purposes? Or I just don't want to throw off that timing.
I keep trying with dates and it's up to the board.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much, I think, committed to doing it on the 8th. Whether the fire board is interested in joining us in that's fine. But I think we should commit to doing it on the 8th and moving forward. With Casson and Sylvia.
I think directors should be present and it should be a noticed meeting so we can participate. Is that okay?
I didn't hear what you said.
I said, I think directors should be at the meeting and it should be a noticed special meeting so we can participate. Is that okay?
It's up to the board. I think that you're making it a formal meeting instead of a general town hall meeting by doing that, which adds additional work in posting an agenda.
Sylvia.
I don't believe we have to go that route. That whole point of having this presented to us today is for us to give our input. And if you want to attend the meeting and listen and hear what citizens are saying, you're welcome to do that. And 5 people could do that, but no more than 2 people could speak. There are some other thoughts Anne might have about how to allow, board participation and public meetings, but I don't think we need to make it a special meeting. Like I said, I actually was going to ask for a closed session item for the next meeting. I don't think that the town hall would impinge upon that. So then I wouldn't be certainly attending, but I don't think it has to be noticed personally.
Alex.
Say that when we plan on having town hall meetings, I'm sure I will hear from, parents if they are interested. Like, it's kind of a chicken and the egg. They're never going to come to a 6 o'clock meeting on a weekday, which is fine because I'm not so sure how many of them would come to a Saturday meeting at 11 on this topic. But it's, we're going to hear it either way.
Alex.
I think we're making this unnecessary complicated and we should just move forward with this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think this is just going to be a meeting for the town to attend and they can present or comment on issues related to hazards and risks. And we have the opportunity to give David whatever our thoughts are on what we've already presented here. And if we need to have another project or 2 to put in there, it can be easily done.
Just say I agree. The board gets a platform to talk and share our thoughts all the time. This is really for the community and to hear from them and to get their questions answered. And David is more than capable of responding to their questions. So I would propose that David, I don't know if we need a motion, draft some language for the outlook with our scheduling our meeting, giving those dates and times and leaving it open that, we hope the fire board might join or will join. And I mean, be clear that it's not certain, but mention it
Second to that motion.
So I do have some input for the 5 plans. I can make it real quick.
Well, why don't you just send them on to David and
Okay.
I can work
Do
with
that.
David on that. I mean, it's an ongoing process. We haven't completed the process by any means.
Okay, but I do think the 5 projects are good.
Mhm.
And thank you for working on that. And I'm fine with not having it be a special meeting and just having citizens. Yeah, I think when you put something in the outlook, it might actually be better not to mention the fire board because they may feel, I don't know, that they weren't given adequate notice, so maybe just say it's a KPPCSD meeting and everyone's invited, so of course they're invited too.
I second Sarah's motion.
All right. Everyone in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, let's move on. Chief, I believe, thank you for waiting.
Good evening again, everyone. The monthly report has been submitted. It's online. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about it.
I have a question. What is our current tally of officers and vacancies, please?
We have 4 vacancies, 5 cops. Yes.
5 officers.
Okay. Wonderful.
Looks good. I think it's great. We're hosting the CHP here.
Excellent. I just wanted to recognize the sergeant in the audience. He had a lot to do. In fact, 99% of the heavy lift of that ALPR program. He's done an amazing job, and I thought he should deserve some recognition. And that is why he has remained here for the whole evening.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sarge. And have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Sergeant Landy. David, your report, I think it's self-explanatory, but anything, your general manager's report?
I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Alex?
I actually don't have any questions. I want to thank you for the detailed report and the way you outlined all the issues and challenges facing us. It was really, really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comment? Well, frankly, I hope residents read it because it details the number of challenges and issues that we're going to be facing this calendar year. And of course, we've already discussed a couple of them today. So I appreciate the detail that you put into it. And I hope it resonates with residents. It certainly did resonate with me. So any comments from directors? I think we exhausted our thoughts on this matter and all others. Okay, so a motion to adjourn?
We don't even need to do that. We don't even need to do that. We
I
are,
know, I was just going through the process. All right, we adjourn.
next meeting is February 8th.
Yes. And thank you, Larry, for sticking it out. And thank you for all the work that well, I appreciate all the work that you've done over the years in the fire district. And most important, all the work you've done with the Emergency Preparedness Committee.